Smith, an adventurer at heart, loved nothing more than escaping the clamor of modern life and immersing himself in the serenity of the wilderness. The mountains, with their towering trees and whispering winds, had always been his refuge. On this particular morning he set out early, the crisp dawn air invigorating his spirit. His destination was a remote mountain jungle, a place known for its unspoiled beauty and unpredictable wildlife. Little did Smith know this hike would forever alter his understanding of the natural world. The trail wound through dense underbrush, the sunlight barely penetrating the thick canopy above. Birds chirped melodiously, and the occasional rustling of leaves hinted at hidden creatures watching from the shadows. As Smith climbed higher, the air grew thinner but fresher, carrying the earthy scent of moss and pine. His boots crunched against the gravel, a steady rhythm that accompanied his thoughts. Smith prided himself on his preparedness, always carrying a well-stocked backpack containing essentials for any situation. As a veterinary intern specializing in wildlife, he found these excursions not only therapeutic, but also opportunities to study animals in their natural habitats. Yet, he had never encountered a situation quite like the one that awaited him. An hour into his hike, Smith paused to catch his breath. It was then he heard it, a faint, high-pitched sound that sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't the call of a bird or the rustle of a small mammal. It was something else entirely, a sound imbued with pain and desperation. The cries grew louder as Smith ventured off the marked trail, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. Every snap of a twig underfoot and every rustle of leaves made him flinch. The dense foliage seemed to close in around him, the jungle suddenly alive with unseen eyes. Finally, Smith emerged into a small clearing. His breath caught in his throat. In the center of the clearing lay a massive bear, her chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Her fur was matted with dirt and blood, and her eyes were half closed in exhaustion. Standing beside her was a small cub, its cries piercing the stillness of the jungle. The cub's eyes locked onto Smith, and in that moment, he felt a connection so profound it defied explanation. The little bear, though clearly frightened, did not retreat. Instead, it approached him cautiously, its small paws treading softly on the grass. Smith froze, unsure of what to do. The cub stopped a few feet away and let out a series of plaintive cries, gesturing toward its mother with its tiny paws. Smith's heart ached at the sight. It was as if the cub was pleading with him, imploring him to help its injured mother. Despite his training, Smith hesitated. The mother bear was enormous, her sheer size a reminder of the danger she could pose if she perceived him as a threat. But the cub's desperate cries spurred him into action. Taking a deep breath, Smith raised his hand slowly, a universal gesture of peace. The cub stepped back, watching intently as Smith approached its mother. His every movement was deliberate, his senses hyper-aware of the potential consequences. The mother bear stirred slightly, her eyes flickering open for a brief moment before closing again. Smith knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he examined her injuries. Her side was slashed with deep gashes, likely the result of a fight with another predator. Blood matted her fur, and her paw was swollen and immobile. Smith's mind raced as he assessed the situation. He knew he had the tools and knowledge to help, but the enormity of the task weighed heavily on him. From the corner of his eye he saw the cub watching him, its small body quivering with anticipation. Smith reached into his backpack, retrieving antiseptic wipes, bandages, and a small bottle of pain relief medication. The cub let out a soft whimper, as if urging him to hurry. With painstaking care, Smith began cleaning the wounds. The mother bear twitched slightly, but did not react aggressively. Encouraged, he worked methodically, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Time seemed to stand still as he focused entirely on the task at hand. 2 hours passed, during which Smith treated the bear's injuries to the best of his ability. He applied bandages to her side, splinted her injured paw, and administered a dose of pain relief. The cub, meanwhile, sat quietly nearby, its trust in him evident. As Smith packed up his supplies, the mother bear stirred again, her eyes opening fully for the first time. She looked at him, her gaze steady and unthreatening. Smith held his breath, unsure of what to expect. But instead of reacting with hostility, the bear let out a low rumbling sound, a sound that, to Smith, felt like gratitude. Exhausted but relieved, Smith stood and stepped back. The cub approached him, carrying something in its mouth. It was a small banana, likely scavenged from the jungle. The cub placed it at his feet and looked up at him with an expression that melted his heart. Smith smiled, accepting the offering with a nod of thanks. As he turned to leave, Smith glanced back one last time. The mother bear was lying down, her cub nestled beside her. It was a sight that filled him with a profound sense of accomplishment and wonder. He had come face to face with the raw vulnerability of nature and emerged with a newfound respect for the bonds that exist between creatures, no matter how different they may seem. Little did Smith know, this was only the beginning of an extraordinary day that would test his courage and forever change his perspective on the interconnectedness of life. Smith continued his hike, leaving the clearing where he had treated the mother bear and her cub. The encounter had left him exhilarated yet deeply reflective. As a wildlife veterinarian in training, Smith had always believed in the value of his work, but that morning's events had awakened something deeper, a sense of interconnectedness and trust between humans and animals. The rest of the day passed uneventfully as Smith traversed the mountain paths, absorbing the serene beauty around him. He stopped occasionally to document the flora and fauna, taking notes for his studies. Yet, no matter how peaceful the surroundings were, he couldn't shake the memory of the mother bear's gaze. It had been so human, almost as though she had been thanking him for his kindness. By late afternoon, the sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light through the trees. Smith decided to begin his descent toward the trailhead. The thought of the bears lingered in his mind as he retraced his steps, wondering if he would ever see them again. But nature, as unpredictable as it is beautiful, had more surprises in store for him. As dusk settled over the jungle, the atmosphere shifted. The once warm hues of the forest were replaced with shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. The cheerful bird songs were replaced with the eerie silence of nightfall. Smith tightened his grip on his walking stick, his instincts warning him to remain alert. Suddenly, a sharp, guttural growl broke the silence. Smith froze in place, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned slowly, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There, barely 10 feet away, stood a wolf, its eyes gleaming with predatory intent. Smith's mind raced as he calculated his options. Running would trigger the wolf's chase instinct, and fighting was out of the question. He tried to appear calm, raising his walking stick in a defensive posture. The wolf bared its teeth, its growls growing louder. Then the wolf lunged. Smith stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. He turned and ran, his survival instincts taking over. The wolf was close behind, its heavy panting and the sound of its claws on the ground filling his ears. Smith's adrenaline surged as he sprinted down the uneven trail, his flashlight bobbing wildly. He could feel the wolf closing in, its presence a dark shadow at his back. Suddenly, his foot caught on a protruding root, and he went sprawling to the ground. The wolf wasted no time, leaping toward him with a feral snarl. Smith raised his arms to shield himself, bracing for the impact. But before the wolf could reach him, a massive figure burst from the shadows. It was the mother bear. Her roar echoed through the forest, a sound so powerful it sent shivers down Smith's spine. The wolf skidded to a halt, its aggression faltering in the face of the bear's sheer size and fury. The mother bear charged, swiping at the wolf with her massive paw. The wolf yelped and retreated, disappearing into the underbrush. Smith lay on the ground, stunned. The bear turned to face him, her eyes meeting his once again. This time there was no fear, only recognition. It was as though she remembered the kindness he had shown her earlier that morning. Smith slowly got to his feet, his heart still racing. He raised his hands in the same gesture of peace he had used before. The bear watched him for a moment before lowering her head, a sign that she meant no harm. The cub appeared from behind her, carrying a small bundle of fruit in its mouth. It placed the offering at Smith's feet, just as it had done earlier. Smith couldn't help but laugh, a mix of relief and amazement flooding through him. He accepted the gift, thanking the bears softly. As the mother bear and her cub turned to leave, Smith called out to them. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. The mother bear paused, glancing back at him one last time before disappearing into the trees. Smith stood there for a long moment, processing what had just happened. He had always known that animals were intelligent and capable of emotion, but this experience had shown him something extraordinary. The bond he had formed with the bears, however brief, was a testament to the unspoken connections that can exist between humans and the natural world. As he continued his descent, Smith couldn't help but marvel at the day's events. The encounter had reaffirmed his commitment to his work, inspiring him to dedicate his life to the protection and care of wildlife. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would lead him to advocate for the very creatures he had encountered that day. Smith began his descent from the mountain after his miraculous encounter with the mother bear and her cub. His mind raced with the events of the day, the trust the animals had shown him, the unlikely bond they had formed, and the sheer luck that had brought them together in the first place. As he trekked along the narrow, uneven trail, he replayed every moment, feeling a mix of awe and disbelief. But the day wasn't over, and nature had one final chapter to write in this extraordinary story. As Smith moved further down the path, the golden hues of the sunset began to dim, casting long shadows across the forest floor. He had been walking for hours, the physical exertion of the day starting to catch up with him. His legs ached, and his backpack felt heavier with each step. Despite the growing fatigue, he felt a strange sense of peace, as though the forest itself was alive and watching over him. As night fell, the forest came alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. The calls of owls echoed through the trees, and the rustling of leaves hinted at unseen animals moving in the underbrush. Smith switched on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, guiding his way. Suddenly, the stillness was broken by a low, rumbling growl. Smith froze, his flashlight scanning the area. His heart pounded as he tried to pinpoint the source of the sound. It was then that he saw them, two glowing eyes reflecting the light of his flashlight. A wolf emerged from the shadows, its fur bristling, its eyes locked onto Smith. Unlike the lone wolf from earlier, this one was larger, more menacing, and its body language made it clear that it was hunting. Smith tightened his grip on his walking stick, his mind racing for a plan. He knew he couldn't outrun it, and the thought of fighting it off seemed equally hopeless. The wolf stepped closer, its growl growing louder. Smith backed away slowly, trying to maintain eye contact, as he had read in survival guides. His flashlight beam wavered, casting eerie shadows across the trees. Just as the wolf crouched, preparing to pounce, a familiar roar pierced the night. Smith's heart leaped as the mother bear charged into view, her massive frame blocking the wolf's path. The cub was right behind her, squealing in alarm. The wolf hesitated for a split second before lunging at the bear, its sharp teeth aiming for her neck. But the bear was ready. She swiped at the wolf with her massive paw, sending it sprawling to the ground. The wolf scrambled to its feet, snarling, and launched another attack. The two animals clashed in a ferocious battle, their growls and roars echoing through the forest. Smith watched in stunned silence, his instincts urging him to run, but he couldn't leave the scene. The bear's bravery was astonishing, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude for her intervention. She was fighting not just for herself and her cub, but also for him, a human she barely knew. After what felt like an eternity, the wolf finally retreated, limping away into the darkness. The bear stood her ground, her chest heaving, her eyes scanning the area to ensure the threat was gone. Smith stepped forward hesitantly, his flashlight illuminating the bear's face. She turned to look at him, her eyes softening. The cub ran to her side, nuzzling against her fur as if to check if she was okay. Smith knelt down, his voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for saving me." The bear watched him for a moment before lowering her head, as if acknowledging his words. The cub, in a gesture of trust and gratitude, approached Smith and placed a small fruit at his feet. Smith smiled, tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't deserve this," he whispered, picking up the fruit. "You've already done so much." The bear and her cub stayed with Smith for a while longer, ensuring the area was safe before finally retreating into the forest. Smith watched them disappear into the shadows, feeling a profound sense of connection and gratitude. As he resumed his hike, the exit point of the trail came into view. The events of the day played over and over in his mind. He knew that what had happened was something few people would ever believe. But it didn't matter. He had witnessed the unspoken bond between humans and animals, a bond built on trust, kindness, and mutual respect. Later, as Smith sat by his campfire, he couldn't help but think about the mother bear and her cub. He hoped they would be safe, that the forest would continue to protect them as they had protected him. That night, he made a promise to dedicate his life to the care and protection of animals, a promise that would shape the rest of his life. Years later, as a fully fledged wildlife veterinarian, Smith often thought back to that day. It wasn't just a story of survival, it was a story of hope, compassion, and the extraordinary connections that can exist between species. And though he never saw the bears again, he carried their memory with him, a reminder of the incredible bond they had shared. As Smith stood at the threshold of the forest, his heart heavy with the weight of parting, the mother bear and her cub lingered at a safe distance, watching him leave. The cub, full of youthful curiosity and affection, paced back and forth as if hesitant to see Smith go. The mother bear, her wise and protective gaze fixed on Smith, gave a low, mournful sound, a sound that felt like both a farewell and a blessing. Smith took one last look at them, silently thanking the pair for their kindness and bravery. It was a bittersweet moment, a goodbye to two beings who had changed his life forever. As he turned and began walking towards civilization, the cub let out a small cry, as if to say goodbye, a sound that stayed with Smith for years to come. The trek back to his car was quiet, yet Smith's mind buzzed with reflections. He felt profoundly changed, as though the forest had not only tested him but also rewarded him with a glimpse into its most intimate secrets. The thought of how the mother bear had defended him from the wolf filled him with a sense of awe. He marveled at how nature, so often viewed as wild and untamed, could also demonstrate acts of care and compassion. When Smith finally returned to his home, he found himself unable to share the full story with anyone. It wasn't that he didn't want to, it was that he feared no one would believe him. Bears saving humans, a cub offering gratitude. It sounded too much like a fable, something out of folklore rather than reality, and yet he knew the truth. This experience rekindled Smith's love for wildlife. He poured his energy into completing his veterinary degree, specializing in wildlife medicine. His professors noted a new determination in him, a deep sense of purpose that made him stand out among his peers. When asked about his motivation, Smith would only smile and say, "I owe it to the ones who showed me what life is about." Years later, Smith found himself working as a wildlife veterinarian in national parks and remote reserves. He became known for his empathy, patience, and an almost uncanny ability to connect with animals. While treating injured animals, he often thought of the mother bear and her cub, silently thanking them for the inspiration they had given him. One summer, while on a research expedition in the very forest where the encounter had occurred, Smith felt a strange pull toward a familiar area. Guided by intuition, he wandered through the dense undergrowth until he came to a clearing. There he saw a bear and her nearly grown cub resting in the sunlight. Smith froze, his breath catching in his throat. Could it be? The bears seemed to recognize him too. The younger bear, now almost full-sized, tilted its head in a way that reminded Smith of their first meeting. Slowly, cautiously, Smith knelt and extended his hand, just as he had done years ago. The younger bear approached, sniffed his hand, and then nudged it gently with its nose. It was them. Smith felt an overwhelming surge of emotion as he realized the bond they had shared had not been forgotten. The mother bear, still strong and majestic, watched from a distance, her calm demeanor suggesting she trusted Smith completely. The reunion was brief, but it left Smith with a renewed sense of wonder. As he walked away, he couldn't help but smile, knowing that some connections, no matter how fleeting, leave an indelible mark on the soul. Smith's story didn't end there. Inspired by his incredible encounter, he began writing a book about his experiences with wildlife. Titled Guardians of the Wild, the book became a bestseller, capturing the hearts of readers worldwide. Smith used the proceeds to fund wildlife conservation efforts, ensuring that animals like the mother bear and her cub would continue to thrive in their natural habitats. He also started a program to teach children about the importance of coexistence with nature, emphasizing that humans and animals share a world filled with mutual responsibilities and unexpected friendships. Smith's story, once kept secret, became a source of inspiration for thousands, and though he never sought fame, he became a symbol of hope and harmony, reminding the world that even in the wildest corners of nature, acts of kindness and gratitude transcend species. Years later, as an elderly Smith sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he often thought of the bears. He wondered where they were, whether they still roamed the forest, and if they remembered him as vividly as he remembered them, and in his heart he knew the answer.